Okay, so welcome sa ating subject, Engineering Mechanics, Statics of Rigid Bodies. Alamin muna natin yung definition ng engineering mechanics. So, ang engineering mechanics may be defined as the science which considers the effects of forces on rigid bodies. Now, alam natin na itong engineering mechanics, meron siyang dalawang branch. Una, statics. Dito natin mapag-aaralan yung effect and distribution of forces sa isang rigid body na nasa at rest na condition. Tapos sa dynamics, dito natin mapag-aaralan yung rigid bodies in motion. Ano ba ang ibig sabihin kapag sinabi nating rigid body? So, ang rigid body is defined as a definite amount of matter, the parts of which are fixed in position relative to each other. So, ibig sabihin, ang rigid body pala is a non-deformable body. Regardless of the magnitude of the force applied to a body, that body will never deform because you assume that body is a rigid body. Now, if ang pag-uusapan natin is yung external effect ng forces sa isang body, nandun tayo sa aspeto ng engineering mechanics. Pero kung pag-uusapan natin ang internal effects ng isang force sa isang body, nandun tayo sa aspeto ng strength of materials which is a separate subject. Okay, so puntahan natin ang chapter 1, Resultant and Equilibrium of Force Systems. So, under chapter 1, meron tayong resolution of force systems. And under that, we have forces and its components, resultant of three or more concurrent forces, moment of a force, principle of moment, Varignon's theorem, resultant of parallel force, couples resolution of a force into a force and a couple. And under the equilibrium of force systems, we have definition and meaning of equilibrium, free body diagrams, equilibrium of concurrent force systems, conditions of equilibrium, and equilibrium of non-concurrent force systems. Okay, so puntahan natin ang resultant of force systems. Forces and its components. Ano ba ang ibig sabihin ng force? Force may be defined as that which changes or tends to change the state of motion of a body. So, yung force, kaya niyang baguhin yung uh, position tsaka yung state of motion ng isang body. Okay. Tapos, meron tayong components of a force. Ano ba ang ibig sabihin ng component of a force? So, a mutually perpendicular forces with respect to a given axis. So, kahit ano pa yung orientation ng inyong axis inclined at a certain angle from uh, the regular XY axis, the components must be perpendicular to each other all the time. Okay. So, meron tayong component of a force in XY plane. So, halimbawa, meron tayong F o yung ating force. Yung force F natin is inclined at an angle of theta x from the horizontal and at an angle of theta y from the vertical. Now, paano ba natin hahanapin itong value ng fx tsaka fy? So, simply use simple trigonometric functions cosine theta and sine theta. Now, to solve for the value of fx, you can use cosine of theta if you are going to use theta x. And you can use theta y as sine theta if you are going to use theta y as your reference angle. Now, using theta x as the reference angle, cosine theta x will be equals to the adjacent over the hypotenuse. Ano ba yung adjacent ng ating theta x? So that is fx. Tapos yung ating hypotenuse, yung force F. Now, using sine of theta x, we have opposite over the hypotenuse, we have Fy over F. So, makukuha natin yung fx is equals to f cosine theta x. Tapos fy is equals to f sine of theta x. So yung ating fx, yan yung ating x component or horizontal component. Tapos yung ating fy, yan yung ating y component or vertical component. Now, itry natin isolve itong ating unang example. Determine the x and y components of the forces shown in the figure. Now, makikita nyo sa figure na meron tayong apat na forces. Okay? So, we have F1. Ang F1, nandun siya sa first quadrant. Yung F2 nandun sa second quadrant. Yung F3, nandun siya sa third quadrant, inclined at a slope of 5 horizontal to 12 vertical. And yung ating F4 is directed at to the right. Okay. So, paano natin isosolve yung ating x and y components? Simply use the formula. Fx is equals to f cosine theta x and fy is equals to f sine of theta x. Now, for force 1, alam natin na sa force 1 yung ating F is 58 tapos yung F is inclined at an angle of 30 degrees with respect to the x-axis. So meron tayong 58 cosine of 30 and 58 sine of 30. So yan yung mga component ng ating force 1. Now, if you can notice, yung ating components ng F1, lahat sila ay positive kasi nga yung F1 is nandun siya sa first quadrant. Okay. So punta tayo sa F2. Now, yung F2 is nandun siya sa second quadrant. So expected na yung isang component ng F2 will be negative and that will be the X component. So we have negative 50 cosine of 45 tapos yung Y component natin or vertical component will be positive kasi nga yung Fy is directed upward. So yan yung mga component ng ating force 2. Now, force 3, yung force 3 natin is nandun siya sa third quadrant. So, expected na lahat ng kanyang or yung kanyang mga component, lahat yun will be negative. Pero ang problema ngayon is paano natin hahanapin yung component? Wala naman tayong angle pero given yung ating slope. So 5 horizontal is to 12 vertical. So therefore, yung inclined natin will be the square root of 5 squared plus 12 squared which is equals to 13. So balikan natin yung ating formula na fx is equals to f cosine theta x. Now, alam natin yung cosine theta is equals to adjacent over hypotenuse. Okay, so we have fx3 will be equals to negative 45. Tapos yung cosine theta x natin will be 5 over 13. And then, yung ating y component will be negative 45. Tapos yung ating sine theta x will be 12 over 13. So yan yung ating x and y component para sa force 3. Para sa ating force 4, now alam natin na yung ating force 4 is directed to the right or towards the positive x-axis. So, ibig sabihin yung horizontal component ng ating force F will be equals to 40 kilonewton while yung kanyang vertical component will be equals to 0. Okay, so puntahan natin yung pangalawang problem. Determine or find the components in the x, y, u, and v directions of the force P is equals to 10 kilonewton as shown in the figure. So, ito yung ating figure. Now, yung ating x and y axis, yan yung kulay violet. Tapos yung ating UV axis, dan yung kulay blue. Now, yung P natin is inclined at an angle of 60 degrees with respect to the XY axis. While yung ating UV axis is inclined at an angle of 20 degrees with respect to the XY axis. Okay. So, papaano natin to isosolve? Simple lang. Okay, considering the XY axis, yung ating P, again, yung ating P is inclined at an angle of 60 degrees with respect to the XY axis. So, ibig sabihin, yung ating X component ng P will be 10 cosine of 60. Tapos, yung ating Y component will be 10 sine of 60. Okay. Now, considering the UV axis, now yung ating P is inclined 60 degrees with the x-axis, xy axis. Tapos yung ating UV axis is inclined at an angle of 20 degrees with respect to xy axis. So, ibig sabihin, ito palang ating force P is inclined at an angle of 60 minus 20, which is equals to 40 degrees with respect to the UV axis. So, yung ating theta ngayon will be equals to 40 degrees. So, PU will be 10 cosine of 40 and PV will be 10 sine of 40. Ito naman tayo ngayon sa resultant of force systems. So, resultant of 3 or more concurrent forces. Ano ba ang ibig sabihin ng resultant force? So, it is a single force obtained by combining a series of forces. Meron tayong mga methods or paraan para ma-solve ang mga resultant force. Okay? So, ito yung ating resultant force in XY plane. So, meron na naman tayong, halimbawa given sa ating problem is yung vertical tsaka horizontal component, Fx, Fy. So, recall na yung ating Fy tsaka Fx is equals to F cosine theta x, and Fy will be F sine of theta x. Yan yung ating xy component. So, yung ating F, which is yung inclined na force, you can use or simply use Pythagorean Theorem kasi makakagawa ka ng right triangle. Kasi nga, yung ating Fx tsaka Fy, perpendicular sila sa isa't isa. Kaya, makakagawa ka ng isang right triangle. Okay. So, using Pythagorean Theorem, your F will be equals to the square root of Fx squared plus Fy squared. Now, to determine the inclination of your force or resultant with respect to the x-axis, again, you can use a simple trigonometric function tangent of theta x, wherein your tangent of theta x will be equals to the opposite over the adjacent equals to Fy over Fx. So, yan yung ating, yung F, yan yung ating resultant. Tapos, yung ating theta x, tangent theta x will be the angle of the resultant with respect to the x-axis. So, try nating mag-solve ng problem. Okay, so meron tayong problem. Sabi, determine the resultant of the forces shown in the figure. So, kung inyong matatandaan, etong problem na to is ito yung problem natin sa example number 1. Now, madali na lang to kasi nakuha na natin yung mga component. So, unang-unang gagawin will be determine the components of each force. Okay, pero tapos na tayo dun sa example number 1. So, ang gagawin na lang is gamitin na lang yung result ng example 1 to determine the algebraic sum of the components in the x and y axis respectively. So, algebraic sum, ibig sabihin, kailangan mo i-consider yung positive tsaka negative sign ng inyong mga components. So, the algebraic sum of the x components will be the resultant force along x-axis, or that is Rx, and the algebraic sum of the y components will be the resultant force along y-axis, or that will be Ry. The resultant along the x and y axis will be the components of the resultant force. With this, simply use the formula R is equals to the square root of Rx squared plus Ry squared. Now, your R is equals to the square root of 37.56 squared plus 22.82 squared. Saan ba nakuha itong 37.52 squared? Yan yung algebraic sum ng mga component along the x-axis doon sa ating example number 1. Tapos itong 22.82, yan yung algebraic sum ng vertical component doon sa ating example number 1. So, taking the square root of R, so your R will be equals to 43.95 kilonewton. Yan yung resultant force ng ating example number 1. Okay.